everyone out there in YouTube land, Dan here, aka the Comic Concierge. So this is one of my comic book countdown videos where I look at the comics I read this past week and rank them from the thing I like the least to the thing I like the most, stealing the idea from other comic YouTubers like Ghost Critic and Sleepy Reader. But I do think it's a really great format just to showcase generally my enjoyment, because I hate things like star ratings because they can kind of be deceiving, where this puts it better in perspective. And this is a week where my number one is by far my number one, and there's books I liked really a lot, and there's books that I didn't like or lukewarm on, and some books simply that I clearly cannot recommend. And we'll start with that. And this book was a bit of a disappointment because this has a great pedigree when you look at the creators, and that's Lady Baltimore, number one, which is brought by Dark Horse Comics, written by Mike Mignola, Christopher Golden, art by Bridget Connell and Michelle Madsen. And I'll just go ahead and say I'm apologizing because I'll probably say names incorrectly this entire video. It's kind of my thing, and unfortunately, I'm bad at pronunciation. Ultimately, though, the comic itself, and this is a new number one. It's a continuation of the old Baltimore series, where is why I had difficulty with it, I think. And maybe if you read the previous Baltimore series, it's going to be a comic that works for you more. But as someone coming in fresh, I was ultimately lost from beginning to end. And it opens up with a conflict with these witches, and there's a magical fight, and everything is just thrown at you right away. And I'm not necessarily against that. I like the idea of put me in head first and let me figure things out, but I need context. And I never got that as a reader. I would get one character, start to understand them, and then we get another group of characters with other conflicts. It never stopped. I never had that foundation to really understand any thread, anything that was going on whatsoever. And I understand that if this is a continuation of a past series, but when you are number one, I guess, do you go in with some expectations that it's going to be welcoming to a new reader, which I cannot say this was. So perhaps, like I said, if you've continued the series, you may enjoy it much more than me. But I think as an objective first issue, it didn't succeed at really bringing the reader in any meaningful way, unfortunately, which I'm surprised by, because obviously this isn't Hellboy, but the Hellboy books have a lot of series like this, do this a lot. And they're great at that. They're so welcoming to new readers, and you can really pick up any, and you'll kind of get it, and you'll understand the relationships really well. Here, I didn't get that. It just seemed like a lot of references to stuff that happened in the past, and those references didn't have enough explanation for me to really follow anything. So I don't know if I'll continue that series. Probably not, unfortunately. I do usually give each series 3 issues, but again, there's just so much out right now that I don't know. We'll see. Next on the list is a book I thought was ultimately fine. It was okay. And that's Dr. Aphra number 8 from Star Wars, Marvel Comics, obviously. And this, for those not know, Dr. Aphra, I think, is one of the best characters that's been created by Marvel within the new Star Wars universe since they got it. This series so far, I don't know. It's been not... I'm waiting for something to happen in the sense of that's really going to get me excited. I do think the characterizations can be strong. One of the best parts of this issue was that it actually deals with the Nihil, and the Nihil are the villains of the current High Republic series that are going on, that happens like 200 years before Phantom Menace. So it was kind of cool seeing that connection. She's like going in and trying to steal stuff from a Nihil ship, and seeing, that world building within itself. As someone who's been enjoying the High Republic books, that's pretty cool. But ultimately, that's just kind of what it was. It was her trying to find something, and there's a danger. They don't want the Empire to get this because it's going to, really be bad for the rebels. Which is part of what's hard with a book like this, is when your stakes are so tied to something so grandiose like that, and you already know the outcome of the other Star Wars movies. It's a little difficult to really feel like there's much at stake there, which is not necessarily the fault of the book. You can't really, it has to do with what it can with the world it has. But on the flip side, though, at least the characters are ones that, because this is, all within the Marvel Star Wars universe, they can all die, really. There's no one here that's safe. So there's that threat, but ultimately the main threat is just kind of there. It's a fun book. The characters are fun. They're enjoyable to read. I didn't dislike reading it. It just wasn't one that I can sit there and say, if you want more Star Wars books, this is the one to check out. I know they have the Bounty Hunter story coming up in a few months, and I wonder if that will be a way to kind of give this new life. Unfortunately, I thought it started off pretty well, but if you're a fan of the character, I think you'll enjoy it. But I don't think it's one that's going to make you a fan of the character if you don't already come in with that previous background of what she did before. Next on my list is a DC book, the Teen Titans Academy #1. And I wasn't sure if I was going to get this, to be honest, but I thought, you know what? I've been enjoying Strange Academy. That was a fun setup. Let me see if it can work for DC. Sometimes these books, are those hidden gems within the Marvel and DC universe because they're not necessarily tied to everything else going on, and you get a lot of cool new characters, and it's a formula that works because you can kind of combine high school drama and with superheroes, which I guess leads to magic. And I think the downside to this, though, is that a lot of the focus is on the Teen Titans themselves rather than the classmates. And I think that's something that Strange Academy has done really well, is that, yes, you have people like Scarlet Witch and Doctor Strange, but the perspective you're seeing are from the students. It makes the world much more interesting that way, because they're trying to experience this magical world for the first time. And here you get glimpses of that, but ultimately, like, the bulk of the story is Nightwing and the other kind of major characters, where the students are really on the side for the most part. And the other thing is that the thing that is like the biggest focus is this Red X character, and it's this thread that goes out. And I don't know why I should care about Red X besides it telling me I should care about Red X. And I get it; it ties to Nightwing's past history because he used it and went down the dark path. But why now? And I feel like it's really banking on you caring about that for this to work. I thought the art was good, and like I said, I do like some of the new characters that are established here. That doll character that was really interesting. I think it's probably going to be the breakout character of the series because she's unlike any other character that's in the book. But outside of that, it was just kind of standard what you would expect for this type of story. Next on my list was Action Comics, again from DC, 1029. Written by drawn by Phil Hester, written by Philip Kennedy Johnson. And when I first read this, I was like, wait, didn't I already read this exact issue? Because this continues from the Superman book with the same artist, the same story, and nearly the same opening. So I was confused at first, like, wait, I read this already. Did I pick? But then I was going through it. I'm like, oh, okay, no, this is different, which is problematic in a way. And I don't understand the point of continuing a story from Superman in Action Comics. It's basically makes it the same comic book, and it's already crossover, and this is just starting. So if you're reading Superman and not collecting Action Comics, and then you get the next issue of Superman, it's going to be really weird, and it doesn't necessarily do a good job of really identifying that. It doesn't necessarily, you go into this and you didn't read Superman because maybe you just want to collect one Superman book. I could see you like not understanding what's going on for the most part. The story itself is pretty simple. Ultimately, there are these evil monsters coming from another dimension that are trying to that are causing Superman to feel pain. Like it's kind of like living kryptonite, but they're not actually kryptonite, but they have the same type of impact. And Jonathan is really scared about him because, based upon the history he saw when he was in the future, this is when Superman dies. So there's this back and forth. And the central theme of this, though, I think is what really works. It's the idea of parenthood through the lens of superheroes, and you seeing Jonathan Kent and seeing his father, and kind of coming to the understanding that his father is not going to be there forever. He is not the perfect person. In a way, he will fall, and that's a big theme throughout. And it's very Superman-esque. I think Philip Kennedy Johnson does understand what works with this character, so that has me excited. Those elements are really strong. The central conflict, though, I think is where it's a bit weak, and in the sense of there's this huge thing where it's like, oh, how are we going to stop these monsters? And the answer to it, I thought, was left a lot to be desired. Ultimately, it's just very almost Fantastic Four-esque, where let's create something really quickly and answer this without going into much detail, which I get, because that's not the point of this story. The point of this story is that relationship between Jonathan and Superman, and being able to kind of understand that maybe your parent will not always be there, and that maybe you can't stop them and from falling, and they can't stop you from falling. And how does that correlate with one another, and the strength, and how that can often strengthen a parental relationship. So I love that the parental relationship is again a focal point of this book. I thought that was one of the best parts of Superman Rebirth when that first came out. Obviously that was a different situation because that was Jonathan as a kid. This is as a teenager. But again, this is giving a reason for Jonathan to be a teenager in a way I felt the Bendis book never did. It didn't necessarily do anything with it I thought that was all that impactful and meaningful. But here we are, as that relationship between Superman and Jonathan evolves into something differently. So again, the art I mentioned in my Superman review, I wasn't a big fan of Phil Hester's art. I don't think he's a bad artist, but not the best artist for this issue. And I think also the inker just didn't do a great job of highlighting the more emotional moments to make them stick. I don't know if it's just me getting more used to it or if the more experience, working together, but I thought this was a bit better. Again, I feel like the alien creations are dull and uninteresting. They're just kind of enormous blobs of green that don't do anything to excite you. The action is fine, but it's Phil Hester I think is better suited when things get weird, and that kind of happens at the end of this issue. Although, not to spoil or anything, because I don't want to give you any major spoilers, there is a big character that shows up, and I wasn't sure if that character was meant to be menacing or look sickly, and it wasn't really clear to me. So, which is not a great way to end the book. But I'm generally, enjoying the Superman run that Kennedy Johnson's doing. Like I said, in thematically more so than narratively at this point. But again, I think it's just him kind of setting the stage and for a bigger thread moving forward. Although I'm not the biggest fan in the way it's being kind of laid out in these comics, because it's not super clear to people that aren't paying attention. And I think you're going to confuse a lot of people that aren't looking and seeing, oh, this is actually, again, if you're reading Superman and you want to continue that story, you need to pick up Action Comics, because it's the same exact, it's continuing one to the next. And, labeling is a big thing, DC. That helps. Like, just put that on the cover. I don't know. And ultimately, that doesn't impact the quality of the book, but it can impact the experience of it. Next on the list is Scumbag, number 6. This continues to be, I'm enjoying this book. I do feel like this joke is running a little thin, though. And what was a little bit disappointing is that this is Ben Gall art, who I'm a huge fan of. He did the Death and Glory series with Rick Remender. I think that ended last year. And what's Ben Gall is really great at is action. There's a issue in that which is like almost like a Mad Max X type of chase sequence, and it's fantastic. This issue was just mostly talking and debating back and forth about Scumbag and him being interviewed. So it's very much a transition issue, which Ben Gall is good at. He makes it look great. It's just like I was hoping for something a little bit more to it than that. And like I said, the humor is there. It's you see this Scumbag character kind of now conflicted because he's kind of stuck between both sides, and it is in a way kind of setting the stage back to where things were in the past. Resetting like where he has now like established this like fortress of Balditude is now his location, and he's being interviewed by a newspaper, and it's it's just showing you where he is now in this current status of being this well-known superhero, where he kind of outed all these secrets, and what's next. And that's kind of where it ends up leaving off. So a transition issue, which again I don't understand the point of putting Ben Gall in an issue like that, except for he can make it more exciting than maybe a traditional artist. And then you have someone coming in for like the next issue, which which is fine. So I have very mixed feelings about this changing artist each issue, because you have like last issue which was Wesley Craig, and it was the best looking book, and now Ben Gall, and again it's just it's great seeing all these different artists getting this, and it gives you a different look each time, but then it does lead to an inconsistent type of story sometimes. So I don't know. It's a fun book. It's just I guess I have higher hopes when it comes to Remender, and I don't think this is one of his better series, at least so far. Next on my list is Cable, number 9, with written by Jerry Duggan and with art by Phil Noto. And this has been, I feel like, the most lean X-Men related book that has come out. By that I mean, like, it doesn't feel like it's super tied to anything else X-Men related. It's kind of just self-isolated, and then narratively it's pretty straightforward compared to like the other X-Men books, which can be pretty lofty to follow with all the different tie-ins and kind of lore that's been building since Powers of X and things like that, where this is just Cable looking to find Strife, the character, not just the emotion, and this seems to be like gearing up for this last act, because this is set to end at issue 12, and you can kind of tell this because it's kind of like dragging its feet a bit until that ending. One of the best scenes though is he's going out trying to find him, and one of the encounters is with Magic, and they go to hell, and it's a very funny sequence in how they're torturing certain individuals in more humane ways, I guess you could say, or maybe even more unhumane ways, depending on what your taste is in music. But it's been a fun book. Phil Noto's art, I love Phil Noto's art. It's so clean, and it's a perfect fitting for this story because you really see like he can sell the humor, he can sell the emotion, and if you're like wanting to get into the X stuff, but the other stuff, the other main books are a little bit too formidable to you. They're just, you're just kind of lost with everything. Cable is a good book, even if you're not a huge Cable fan. If you hated Cable from the 90s because he was just guns and pouches, this is a different take being young Cable. And I didn't think I'd ever care about young Cable, but this is getting me to care about him. So nothing earth-shattering, but just rather solid character stuff that's fun, enjoyable, and you can kind of move on to the next thing. Speaking about moving on to the next thing, we have the Comic Book History of Animation number 4. And this one centers on the Saturday morning cartoons and the history of Saturday morning cartoons, which I found pretty fascinating, and just how everything came about. So this is a docu-comic. This is all nonfiction information about that process. And I grew up in a generation where Saturday morning cartoons were a pretty big deal. Maybe one of the last generations, because by the time, well, I was probably watching cartoons a lot longer than I should, but by the time I was like in high school and college, cartoons on Saturday mornings were kind of passé. But this gets into where they came from, why they came the way they did. I thought like one of the more interesting bits were about like how they took a lot of the classic Looney Tunes and shorts that they had in the cinema and had to recut them into for television. But because of the FCC, they had to cut out so much things like the violence and things like that, which is why a lot of the like Looney Tunes shorts, that the first ones that ever were created, that were meant more for movies than TV, were much more violent and provocative than those that end up on Saturday mornings. It's into like Hanna-Barbera and how it changed animation and found a very cheap way to do animation where it would just change the head of a character rather than the body, making it easier and quicker to animate. It's all about things. And also the big theme that's throughout this is corporate greed, really, how corporations will come in and just try to milk animation for as much as it can to turn a profit. Especially in the 80s when you get in the cartoons meant to sell toys and things like that. But it was really there from the very beginning. So just like how you have this constant conflict between the artists who want to create something worthwhile and the corporations who just like, they don't care. It's meant for kids, pump it out. Let it make money, which is very similar in some ways to the history of comics. So if you're a fan of history, if you're a fan of of animation or the history of like Hollywood in general or anything like that, great thing to pick up. Even if you've not read the past issues, you just want to learn more about Saturday morning cartoons, you can just read this without picking up the past issues. Though, and next issue is going to talk about anime and manga, so I'm excited about that. It's touched upon that a little bit before this, and I should say the art in this is fantastic. They have because Flintstones are in this and other characters, and they do some characterizations of those. And one of my favorite though is how they use they take Hayao Miyazaki and make him look like Toro, and that's been a theme throughout. So, and now with next issue being all about anime and manga, I'm excited to see how that goes. So, all right, next on our list, and we're now getting into books that I overall really enjoyed or enjoyed for the most part. This is Tana. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Probably going to go with no. And this is issue number 4. This is the first time I've ever read or experienced this character ever. And the reason I picked it up was because Stephanie Phillips, I have been enjoying her writing with Butcher in Paris, Amanda Mungy, for example, recently, Nuclear Family for Aftershock. And this book is obviously the character Tana comes from heavy metal. And this is akin to Sword and Sandals type of action, but in space, more fantasy based. And it's a lot of action, a lot of her kicking the crap out of creatures. One of the cool parts about this too is there's a city that is on the back of this gigantic tortoise. So it's the scale in this is fantastic. The art has changed from I think from the first few issues, but it's still pretty strong because, like you said, it's a lot of action. The story's a little light. But ultimately, it's just if you're in that type of mood where you just want some escapist entertainment, and maybe you aren't digging the current run that Marvel's doing with Conan, I think this is a suitable replacement for it. Again, it's nothing lofty. The narratively, it's pretty thin. It's not. It's baking mostly on the action and the world and these crazy creations, but as each issue has gone by, I thought it at least has done more to kind of build this character into someone I care about. Next on my list is Crimson Flower number 3. Again, this is from Dark Horse Comics, with written by Matt Kent, with art by Lewinsky, and I probably pronounced it incorrectly again. The reason I love this book is because of the art. It's so ugly, it's beautiful in a way. It's about this girl who's seeking revenge, and I should say this cover looks nothing like the actual art itself. It really gives you a false understanding of what this book is like, because this is this like serene scene of calm and kind of beauty, where this was a very ugly, violent issue. So in a sense of kind of setting expectations for the book you're about to read, this does not succeed at that. Artistry sure is there, but it's a good looking cover. It just maybe give you false expectations about what you're going to read. Ultimately, this girl who her father was killed when she was younger. She saw the death happen, and she's been on this rampage to kind of enact revenge. What's a little bit different, though, is that it's taking a lot of folk tales and using it to correspond with her journey. And at times, she'll even see individuals as classic folktale creatures, like wolves or something like that. In this, though, the tables get turned a bit. And in the sense of, she thinks she's been pretty unstoppable, really. And that's even in the beginning, she's got this insane action sequence. But things get kind of turned on their head, and, the danger gets kind of ramped up a little bit by the end of this issue, kind of setting up for the conclusion, which I'm assuming is coming next issue or very soon, because it does feel like it's nearing its end. So yeah, it does fall into those revenge tales. So if you do enjoy those, but I do think just the way it's done does make it a little bit more utilizing those folktales as a kind of backdrop. And like I said, the art is just what I love. Just there's great texture to it. There's a lot of energy. I hate comparing anyone to Jack Kirby, because that's like comparing every basketball player to Michael Jordan. But why I think it's like Kirby, just because of the oddity of it. And then the anatomy may not be correct because it's not meant to be, but it's always dynamic. It's always interesting, no matter what's happening. It is almost surreal in the way that like the bodies move, but it really rides that line very well. So it may not be for everyone, because it is so different. It is very unique, and like I said, it is ugly, but ugly. If you like that ugliness like I do, bode well. So alrighty, next on the list, let's go over to Stray Dogs number 2, and this is their homage cover, which I think is homaging the Pet Cemetery, if I'm not mistaken. So this is the second issue. The first issue, I think, really hit people strong. It was just this dog who shows up, and then at this house, and she's scared, and she's around all these other dogs, and suddenly she starts to realize that the person that has dropped her off may have or may not have murdered her master. And this is that then furthering that investigation, them trying to figure out. She partners with like the head dog of this location, and they try to look to see if this is actually what happened. But there's some fallout to that. Some bad things happen. The biggest thing that I take away, similar to with Crimson Fall, is the art is really strong. The cartooning, it's not easy to draw animals. It's not easy to draw animals, animate in this way, having this type of facial expressions, especially in a comic book where you're looking at a still image. But it's great. Dogs look like dogs. It rides that line of looking cartoony. It's never looks realistic, but because of that, you get a lot of emotion and animation out of these panels. Story wise, like I said, you're just it's very simple, but in a good way, where she's just trying to hide really it's this cat and mouse game. I guess a bad pun in a way, and you're just wondering, what will happen. And there's that always present danger, because if this man is a serial killer, well, if he's gonna kill people, clearly dogs are no different. So it's just got a nice mystery to it. There's nothing really else like it right now. Which is, I think, one of the best compliments I can give it. Like, there's really nothing I can point to and saying this is like that. I know it compared itself to like Silence of the Lambs meets Lady and the Tramp, which you can kind of see, but I would say it's more akin to Rear Window, but instead of the person looking out the window, it's the dogs looking inside the home to better understand, like, is this person that's living with us actually a bad human? And you think about dogs just look at what they see, and they don't see bad. Dogs like Nazis, Nazis had dogs, so maybe the serial killer would have dogs. So it's perplexing design in that way, because you're like, these dogs are just aloof, but maybe they can kind of figure out more. of what's going on. But ultimately, I'm just rambling. So I did like it. It's fun. I look forward to that. It's very quick and breezy read too. All right, getting into my final 3 this week, and this was probably my most anticipated book going in because it's one of my favorite current series, and I thought it did a good job, especially if I compare it to the Lady Baltimore #1 that came out this week, and that's this is Bitterroot #11, written by Chuck Brown, David F. Walker, with art by Sanford Greene. And Sanford Greene art, I know I'm talking a lot about great art. Again, I love Sanford Greene's art in this. It's unlike anything else. He utilizes the entire page. There's so much life to this. And this is, in a way, this issue 11, this book is back for the first time in a number of months. And smartly, it kind of just resets the stage. It's more of a coda to the last arc than kind of a continuation of a new story. By the end, we do see where things are going. But ultimately, this is just designed to kind of set the stage of where we are now. The world's a little bit different. So this story is about this family that fights these monsters that are called the Jinhu, which are these creatures that come from another dimension, and they try to... It's like Ghostbusters, but it takes place in the Harlem in the 1920s. And last issue, things didn't go as they expected. So now you see a new world where these demon-like creatures are kind of adapting into your general way of life. There's a fantastic looking page of looks like a kind of a dance party, like a shindig, as you would, and you see like kind of these humans that have like little horns on their head, and you see the world is changing. And what you really realize with this issue too is how much the lore of Bitterroot has been built over these 10 issues. There are so many characters, but rich characters. Although this takes place a lot in Harlem, there are other bits taking place in Tennessee, for example. And the universe it's created has been really impressive over these 10 issues. And it's done it really stealthily in a way too, because like it felt like the last 10 issues happened in only a very short time, but you realize, oh, by the end of it, look at all these characters we have and look how strong they are. And now, what is the new status quo, and like where are they going forward? If there's one downfall to this issue, it's probably the ending. Like the cliffhanger to get you excited for the next issue is a little bit predictable. Nothing that is super exciting, but I think what really gets you excited about moving forward is just seeing how this world is going to be different. And it's going to be unlike the Bitterroot for the first 10 issues. This is an entire new world, so that has me excited. And anytime, again, I get more Sanford Greene art, I'm all for it. So this is very welcoming, I would say, to new readers. If you've not read the first 10 issues, it does set the stage and give you a good lowdown of everything that's happened without being overly without having too much exposition. At the same time, I would not advise starting with this issue because it's better to experience those first 10 issues because there are bits and pieces detail that they did leave out. So and when I compare that to, like, say, Lady Baltimore, which is a new #1, which could have learned a lot from issue 11 of Bitterroot. All right, our final 3. I think I said 2, but this is the final 3. Next on my list is Ha Ha, issue #3. Speaking of, I didn't do that without realizing it, and this is I don't want to say silent issue because there are a couple word balloons and you do read a little bit, but this is centers on a mime, and each issue of Ha Ha is a separate story. It's an anthology series, and this follows that same concept. And the art is what obviously makes it work, because if you're not going to have any language, you need to have a good sequential art to tell the story. And Roger Langridge is not an artist that I am super familiar with, but I thought he did a great job. It's got a kind of cartoony look to it. It's very bright and colorful in your face in that way. And just the general animation, the storytelling is there. You never question what's happening. You know exactly what's happening. The story itself is pretty simple. This mime, who's a little bit down on his luck, as most mimes probably are, finds friendship an unlikely source of this robot that he just finds in the dump, and they kind of start this friendship, but things kind of go awry. If there's one issue I have with it, again, not to harp on ending so much, but I do think the ending was, sometimes I wonder if it's sad because it's supposed to be sad rather than it's necessarily the best way to end the story. But it was satisfying in that way, at least. And I did enjoy it. I've read a lot of silent comics in the past. The Lab from last year is actually a graphic novel that has no words to it, and if I compare that to this, it's a little unfair because it has more pages. That is a much more deep and provocative narrative than this, but this is successful at what it tries to do. It is able to get these characters built without having them speak any word. You can care about the relationship because you can see, why they would finally kind of find hope with one another as they're kind of two lost souls. And then, of course, it being haha, you have the things don't maybe go as you would want, unfortunately. So again, I don't know if it would be my favorite issue of the series thus far. I still think that's probably issue number 2, but it was good. It was fun. I do appreciate W. Maxwell Prince always trying to experiment with the medium and do things and never rest on his laurels. And again, you have to clearly credit the artists as well, because they were doing all the heavy lifting in this with since there weren't many words. My last two, my next one comes from, again, I didn't plan on this, but my last two is also number 2. And this is Shadow Doctor number 2 by Peter Calloway and George's Gentry, I should say. And I don't know if I rank this as number 2 simply because I really appreciate a story about people that has nothing to do with anything that's supernatural, anything that do that's science fiction. It's just a good crime story. What's surprising about this issue is that the main character in it's really Al Capone. It's an Al Capone character piece that kind of fleshes him out as a human being, which is a bit weird. To be honest, I was not expecting to have any form of sympathy or see Al Capone as a normal human being with hopes and dreams and being somewhat of a good guy. I do wonder if they're gonna, showcase the darker side of him, of course, knowing that he was a monster. But the center of the story, it's based on a true story of the grandfather of the writer, Peter Calloway, who was a doctor, but he couldn't ever start his own practice because being an African American, no one would ever give him a loan. So he kind of went out and utilized his connections to helping the mob in the past to do that. And this is him trying to use those connections with Al Capone to get the money to start his practice. Again, though, that really shifts and it becomes Al Capone's story. And you see him kind of conflicted about wanting to help this guy, but not really wanting to help him because he cares about him, and he knows that if he gives him money and he can't pay him back, he's going to have to, do something he doesn't want to. So just to avoid that issue, he doesn't want to provide him the funds he needs. So you see this kind of progression of him going back and even doing some flashbacks to him as a younger person, and then coming to the final conclusion at the end. And it was just, again, well done. A great character piece on a historical figure. I don't know how factual it is, to be honest. I know, again, this is based on a true story with his grandfather, but people change and adjust things, and that's perfectly fine. But as someone who enjoys that time frame, that time period, that history, I like this. And I think a reason why this issue stood out to me was because you took what I thought would be a really quick part of the story, like him getting the funds from Al Capone, but really stretching it out to show the challenges of that conversation and how it wasn't so straightforward, and then utilizing it to build character. Just really strong way, great pacing, great way of setting up the story to make everything matter the way it should, and not just make things seem easy or unearned. So highly recommend checking that book out. I really liked issue number 1, and issue number 2 was just as strong. Alrighty, we're finally there to my number 1, the book I enjoyed the most this week. And it's not too surprising to me. It was one of my most anticipated books coming out this week. And the last issue was my favorite issue of the week it came out. So it continues with issue number 5 of Barbellion, Red Planet. And this is from the Black Hammer universe. So, of course, Jeff Lemire's attached. Although the head writer in this is Tate Rombell, with art by Gabriel Hernandez Walta, colors by Jody Belair, and letters by Edita Bidikar. So, and this is just a great looking book. One of the best looking books of all the Black Hammer universe. And you can kind of see why, because that's a murderer's row of great comic creators, from writers, artists, letterers, everyone right there. And this is the final issue of the Black Hammer miniseries. And what really got to me in this, similar to the last issue, is the use of the 9-panel grid, which I know kind of people can roll their eyes because it's overused so much. But I thought this was one of the best examples of it. It was really strong last issue, and that continued here because the way it utilized it to kind of forward its theme. And the big theme in this story is resistance. This is Barbellion kind of existing in what is basically 1980s New York during the AIDS crisis. And you're seeing a lot of those in the LGBTQ community fight against the oppression that they're feeling. And Barbellion is also dealing with the fact that he has been an outcast to his own homeworld, and now he's in Mars. He's basically brought back there to answer for past crimes. So you have these two concurrent battles going on of resisting this force that's trying to control your life and endanger your life. And having that AIDS crisis at the center, I think, gives this a context that the other Black Hammer universe books don't necessarily have. They're fun, they're great deconstructions of the superhero genre, but this to me was a bit more. It got into things a bit different. It had a level of social commentary that the other stories necessarily didn't, which is fine. That all superhero books need to have that, but it did really, it caused it to, I feel like, have a stronger, more emotionally tied narrative to the end. And again, the use of 9-panel grid I thought was very effective. It starts early with how one panel is this white blank panel, and it becomes bloodier and bloodier and bloodier as this resistance to go on, just to kind of show what is happening and the difficulty that's going through. And clearly blood is also a reference to, you're dealing with the AIDS crisis at this time as well. What you see too is a continuous motif of hands, and the hands connecting, either utilizing them as fists, utilizing them as moments of power, but also a tenderness and kindness, a loving as well. Just showing that connection just through the act of hands, what hands can do, that human connection. And that was a big part of last issue, and that continued. And honestly, I didn't notice the use of 9-panel grid in the first few issues, so I don't know if it was there and I just wasn't picking up on it. But these last 2 issues, I like when people can use the framework of comics and use like an old school trick like that, but doing it in a way that's meaningful, not just because it'll look cool. There's a reason for it, and it's a very effective reason. It's a very moving issue, and it's an emotionally charged issue, which I did not expect the series to be necessarily going in, which I think I haven't really felt that way since the first miniseries, that was kind of like Starman in the Black Hammer universe, where you had this father-son relationship that was the center of that. Here, you have a different sense of relationship, and Barbellion being this outcast that simply who can't find his way. Like, even in going to another planet, he's still chastised for trying to be the person he is, but you see him trying to just accept himself, and that's really been his journey. And along with like finding something to fight for. If you've not read the Black Hammer universe, you can pick this book up, and you really don't need to read anything else. It's all here. So it's helpful. It does, if anything, it makes the other Black Hammer books stronger, because Barbellion becomes an even deeper and more complete character, but it's also its own thing. So you don't necessarily need those to follow along. All right, that's it for me for this video. Thanks for checking it out. If you want to check out some of my other stuff, I recently did a video on the first issue of Captain America to put it in historical context. Really proud of that video. I've not done that much research since I was in college. Also, you can look forward on Monday for a starting points video where I'll look through all the upcoming books coming out next week to look at ongoing series starting new arcs, notable new number 1s, and graphic novels and trade paperbacks being released. Just remember, comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, keep reading.